Tens of thousands of people in France took to the streets to protest Marine Le Pen, who is running against the incumbent Emmanuel Macron for president in France. Now, what's notable here is that new polling indicates that she is closing the gap between herself and Macron, although the gap is still pretty big. A new poll out Saturday by Ipsos Sopra shows that Macron is leading 55.5% versus 44.5% for Le Pen. Now, what's concerning here is Macron, of course, is the incumbent, and so the voters have a record to look at when determining whether or not he deserves to be reelected. They already had the first round of elections on April 10th, and now they're looking toward the future with the April 24th runoff election. And it's just concerning because some of his austerity measures or his attempted austerity measures don't bode well for him. But the protesters took to the streets to say that while they might dislike Macron, he's certainly better than Le Pen. So let me give you the details on that. The protesters made it overwhelmingly clear that in saying no to the far right, they don't like Emmanuel Macron either, but will reluctantly hold their noses and vote for the current president in order to defeat the far right Le Pen. That sounds very familiar. We have a very similar system here in the United States, or similar outcome when it comes to the general elections here in the United States. One activist even argues that it's incredibly important to defeat Le Pen in order to preserve democracy. He says this: people need to realize that despite their anger toward Macron and his policies, there is no equivalence between a liberal conservative candidate and a far right candidate. And the activists are also calling attention to the fact that Macron really did mess up. For instance, he had promised to carry out some climate-related policies. He fell short in that regard. He now claims that if he gets reelected, he'll be hyper-focused on that. We've heard similar things here in the United States with our Democratic politicians. And I want to also draw attention to the mass protest that took place a few years ago, known as the Yellow Vest movement. The corporate media sold that as a protest in response to a gas tax, when in reality it was about what Macron had been proposing overall, how his policy overall was really focused on austerity, essentially charging more taxes for pensions, things like that. And the workers in the country were furious about it. I give you all those details because that context is important in understanding why these neoliberal policies fail and actually put the country at a unique disadvantage, and put the country at a disadvantage by essentially paving ways for people like Donald Trump, people like Le Pen to essentially succeed, right? We don't know if that's gonna be the case here, but it is concerning that Le Pen is kind of closing that lead that Macron had.
Look, this is the same phenomenon happening all across the world. So you've got people who are theoretically center-left, but in fact are economically right-wing. And that's the neoliberal camp that Anna's talking about, that Biden is in, Macron is in, you name it, right? And then you have a populist right-wing. And so people get super angry at basically corporate rule that is happening in all of these countries, and they're looking for an outlet. And luckily in France, there is a left-wing outlet that they could vote for. In fact, I'm gonna give you those numbers in a second. But since they didn't win in terms of getting in the top two, that's why they're going, God damn it, now we gotta vote for Macron because the other guys are so bad. It's exactly the situation we have in America. In fact, I love this quote. One of the left-wing activists said, better a vote that stinks than a vote that kills. And that describes the whole world, right? Whether it's Brazil, it's Philippines, it's France, it's America. And so why is that happening? Because when you have corporate rule that is pressing down on all of us, think about it, guys. They have to maximize profit, the public corporations, whether they're French or American. When they're maximizing profit, who are they gonna maximize it off of? You. They're gonna raise the prices as much as they possibly can. They're gonna pay your salaries as low as they possibly can. That's how you maximize profit. So eventually they succeed at that, and they get you to subsistence level existence where you could barely eke out a living and you've lost all economic dignity. And then they go, I don't know why you're mad. And then a populist comes along from the right wing and goes, oh, I can make it better if you just hate the right people. And that is a very tempting message, unfortunately, for humanity. And here in America, they crushed the left-wing alternative. So there's no populist left-wing alternative. So that you're forced to vote between a vote that that stinks and a vote that kills. So to give you a sense of what happened, the reason everybody's scared in France is because the original vote, when everybody was in the race, before it was down to 2 people, was Macron at 27.8%, Le Pen at 23.1%, right behind him, okay? Now, the part that a lot of people leave out is that the left-wing candidate came in at 22%. So that's a big number for the left wing and almost came in second. So at least, in France, you're worried about Le Pen, and you should be. You got to get rid of the fascists and then get rid of corporate rule. Because if you let the fascists win, there's no democracy to get rid of corporate rule, right? But stop enabling the neoliberals who are not your friends. You at least have the option of voting for the actual left wing. Here in America, we don't even have that option, right? And our media is our biggest enemy. Anytime a populist left winger comes out, they're like, oh, terrible, boo! And they just go set out to destroy them, right? So that's the propaganda arm of the corporate world. Now, one more thing that Anna referred to, which is why did Macron become so unpopular? Do you remember he won relatively easily when he was somewhat unknown and he was from a completely new party? So the mainstream media in France was like, oh, no. Of course, everyone will vote as they are ordered for the traditional parties. No, Macron won because he appeared to be an outsider because he was not from one of the larger parties. But in reality, he was always in favor of neoliberalism and austerity programs. So when he came in, he did a tax gas on diesel gas, which France uses a lot more of. What is that? That's a tax on the average guy.
Right, it's regressive.
It's a regressive tax. It's a form of austerity. He did other austerity programs that just punished the middle class and the poor. And then his popularity went, after the diesel tax alone, went from 62% to 26%. That's where he lost everything, right? And that's the part of the story they don't tell you. His predecessor, Hollande, he actually worked for. And when he left office because of Macron's economic policies, again, austerity policies, Hollande had gone down to 4% popularity.
Cool, why not mimic the same failed policies and political rhetoric and watch the far right candidate rise to fame? I mean, again, look, France is certainly different from the United States in many ways. The amount of GDP that they spend on social programs, I mean, the US pales in comparison. However, there are very similar dynamics here. And Macron's first year and a half was dominated by austerity-related proposals. So much so that public workers took to the streets, there were mass protests and strikes. And it's not popular. These are not popular policies. And when you put that up against the fear mongering and the hatred that's offered by the far right candidate, unfortunately, that seems to speak to a certain portion of the electorate. And the neoliberal candidate discourages people from even participating in the elections at all. We see that at a much bigger extent, a larger extent here in the United States.
So that's exactly right. And when you suppress the truth, it creates these unintended consequences. So when you tell people, no, the politicians are honest. No, taking the money from the middle class instead of the rich is the right thing to do. No, corporate contributions to politicians aren't corruption at all. Number one, you erode faith in institutions. Number two, you force people to go looking for answers. And the correct answer is corporate rule is the problem, but all of the major media organizations, with a few exceptions like us, are corporate owned. So they're not gonna tell you that the problem is them. They're not gonna tell you that the problem is giant multi-billion-dollar corporations like CNN, like Washington Post owned by Jeff Bezos, and on and on. So they lie to you and tell you that politicians are honest and that austerity policies are wonderful. And the system is not rigged by the rich. And then when the right-wing populist comes in and goes, oh, it's the blacks, it's the immigrants, it's the Jews, all of a sudden people go, oh, well, I know what media is saying is a lie. I wonder if that's true.
Yeah, and in France, it's the Muslims, which we have plenty of here in the United States.
But in that kind of, that works better in France because there are more Muslims in France.
Right.
Here they mainly talk about Latinos because there are more Latino immigrants, right? But by the way, at the end of the day, it always comes back to anti-Semitism because people think, yeah, but who really controls everything? Now, and that one resonates, which is really scary because that doesn't make any sense. That's not at all true, right? But they think, oh, the people with money. God, we are playing with the devil here. We're flirting with absolute disaster. That's because mainstream politicians and mainstream media will not tell you the truth under any circumstance, because the truth is they're the ones who rigged the system. Thanks for watching The Young Turks, really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR, so those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.